Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hey, it's Josh from AirOps. I do content and SEO at AirOps, and I'm really happy to have Vince from Buzzstream today. Vince, how's it going?
Going great, Josh, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're going to dive into digital PR today. But first, one thing we always do in the chat, if you will, is if this is your first time here, put a star in the chat. Perfect. Great to have everybody here. So we are going to be really diving into 31 million emails, what a study of 31 million emails is showing us about digital PR. Vince, if you want to go ahead, Vince is going to take control today. Start sharing your screen there and we'll set everything up. But this topic is really important for content teams, but also for SEO as we're building mentions, citations, all of those things. And Vince is going to get us going here.
All right, guys.
There we
Guess I
go.
should do presenter view, huh?
Yeah, do that.
Here we go.
All right. Vince is currently at Buzzstream, Director of Content Marketing, and previously at Siege Media. He also does a regular podcast as well. Where can folks find that?
Yeah, we post on YouTube and Spotify. Most of the platforms will have it.
Yeah, what's the name of it?
It's just called the Buzzstream Link Building and Digital PR Podcast, I think is the official full name, getting all that SEO value I can out of that name.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll find the link for that. We'll drop it in the chat. Next slide, we'll see what we are talking about today. Yeah, like we mentioned, 31 million emails, what it shows about digital PR. So we're going to talk about how digital PR is changing, why the old strategies aren't quite working so much anymore. And then really the meat of this is going to be the case for hyper-relevance. I've seen the previews of these slides. This is like the main takeaways that everyone needs to be aware of. So yeah, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. And so if you do have a question, go ahead and drop that in the chat and I will get to those at the end. We've got a lot of slides to go through. This is a talk that Vince actually did at Brighton SEO a couple weeks ago, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, perfect. Let's hit the next slide here. Yeah, and so I'm with AirOps. Yeah, you've probably been here before, but if not, I'm with AirOps, and we help you thrive in AI search and win AI search. So one of our packages we have right now is around an exclusive content refresh package. So you can see 3 workflows to help you for AI search in your brand. And then you also get access to our AirOps prioritization dashboard. This is an LLM visibility tracker that shows you how you're appearing in chat, GPT, Perplexity, and then our differentiator is you can then take action to help you appear in LLMs as well, along with refreshing for SEO. So if you want a strategy to refresh your content like Webflow, Lightspeed, and others like you see there at the top, scan the QR code or email us at growth@airops.com. Just put webinar in the subject line. So yes, now we are going to kick it off. Take it away, Vince.
All right, awesome. My webinar is going to be pretty short because digital PR, as you may know, is super easy these days. You get like a big city study like this, you gather a bunch of data, you're going to blast it out to a few thousand journalists. There's a guy on LinkedIn that keeps telling me I can send out to 3,000, heck, 5,000, 10,000 journalists. And then you're going to just sit back and you watch all those links roll in. And this is where if I'm on stage, I walk off cheekily and everybody laughs because we know it's not that easy. It's fun to highlight some of these kind of blatantly wrong examples of digital PR and outreach tactics in general. But I want to start with a story because this kind of stuff is happening and this kind of messaging has repercussions. So we had a client come to us, sorry, a customer come to us at Buzzstream and told us they wanted to do a lot of the same stuff, right? They saw what was happening on LinkedIn, what everyone's talking about. They wanted to send out a ton of emails, 5,000, 10,000 emails for their digital PR campaigns and expected to get tons of links. But before they could even get a single campaign sent out, they were banned from their email provider, Mailgun. So we gave them some feedback and tried to get them to cut down on what they were doing and focus more on the right people and personalize their emails. But unfortunately, they still got banned from Google because they would not change their tactics. So what I'm going to talk to you about here, and I promise I'll come back to that story because it does have a happy ending, but we analyzed at Buzzstream 31 million emails and found that the smaller, more targeted campaigns, they vastly outperform those large generic ones. So I think the main reason this stuff isn't working is because the old strategies that we're used to and that used to work just aren't. We've had plenty of people come to us at Buzzstream, and I talk to people on the podcast that tell me back in the day they do, and this is even a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, they do the same exact tactic and they would expect 80, 90 links, and now they're lucky if they get 10 links out of it. So we're seeing this idea that digital PR is harder. We surveyed people, found that 71% of digital PR professionals feel that way, is more challenging than it was. And I think when things get challenging, the urge is to send more, right? You want to overcompensate and you do more of the spray and pray tactic. Unfortunately, like we are seeing the sends are up. When I looked at the BuzzStream data since 2023, and again, the strategy used to be you could go into a media database, do like a keyword search, export a big list, and blast it out. You could go into Twitter and do another keyword search in your advanced search operators and find some people who talked about the same stuff in their bios, and you build a list that way. But these things they just don't work anymore. And there's a couple of reasons that are really driving this home. And one of them is that the news sites are cutting journalists. Now, if you've been in this industry, you're probably feeling this and you know about this already. 900 layoffs so far, according to Press Gazette, and we're seeing this kind of stuff happening. But on the other side of things, there's more demand for digital PR. And as more people hear about digital PR, we're seeing searches like this peaking at all for all times. And so there's this influx of people into the digital PR world, right? They all want to show up in AI citations because there's highly correlated evidence there. They want to get in the digital PR game. But what this is causing now is just more pitches is journalists, the smaller pool of journalists that we have, it's just getting inundated with pitches. And ultimately, according to Muckrack, just half of the journalists here say they seldom or never get relevant pitches. I'm gonna let that sink in. It's pretty eye-opening. And again, talking to customers and digital PR professionals, I think you used to kind of do this thing where you'd spend most of your time building your media list, focusing in on these kind of like VIPs. These are the places that your clients want you to get focused on and they want to get seen in, their competitors are getting seen in. And so you fill out the rest of your media list with just whoever, right? What's the worst that could happen if this journalist isn't a great fit? Let's break that down a little bit. At the very least, you're going to piss off a journalist and they're probably going to ignore you forever. But there's other repercussions of this too. Google and Yahoo last year, they rolled out these very strict penalties against users sending these generic blasts. Outlook followed suit this year. So there's definitely a lot moving against these large generic blasts. And but the worst case scenario is you're going to get banned, as we've seen. So let's now talk a little bit about targeting because even the people that I think I've talked to who think they're doing it the right way, I think we still need to be even more targeted than you think. So let me tell you a little bit about this data that Josh alluded to, this 31 million emails. I looked at a lot of the Buzzstream users who specialize in digital PR and really sliced into their data to find that the smaller, more targeted campaigns had 16% better open rates, 68% higher reply rates. And ultimately, the thing that most people care about is the links. 17 times more links, not 17%, 17 times more links from this smaller, more targeted outreach. And I don't want you to take away that, I don't want the idea that you take away here is that you could just cut your list down and you're going to do fine. That's not necessarily here. What I'm trying to get by here is that the targeted, more relevant lists are the better ones. They tend to be smaller because it takes a lot more time and effort to build them. So now let's talk about this kind of idea of relevance, right? What does a targeted relevant piece of outreach look like? And I want to introduce you to Rosie Taylor. Rosie is this award-winning journalist. We had her on our podcast. She's an awesome PR. She also does a lot of consulting. She's got a great Substack to definitely check out. And so she's a journalist that specializes in health and consumer topics, right? This is her little blurb on her site, health and consumer topics that affect women and families. Now, she was kind enough to share a little snippet of what her inbox looks like. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to look through here and tell me how many you see here that are relevant to someone who covers health and consumer topics for affecting women and families. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's all you get. So here's what when I did this, I found about five. Okay, so I see National Health Service, Royal College of Nursing. They seem relevant to help someone in health and consumer, but realistically, when I talked to Rosie, she said none of them. And I started digging into it a little bit, and I understood looking at her content why this was the case. None of them focused on women. As you can see, this is some of her content that she's written. Here's the clear connection. And talking with her a little bit more, one of the other things she said is she typically writes exclusives. So unless these are pitched to her exclusively, she's not going to cover them really. And that's another thing where if you're digging into her content and understanding how you need to actually be relevant in Rosie, you can actually see this kind of stuff. You see this little line here that says the independent can reveal that's indicative of an exclusive here. And that's not anything you're going to see when you're looking at like a media database. This is only something that you're going to see if you're doing the due diligence and really digging into it. So let's talk a little bit more about what these kinds of relevance. I broke it up into these four pieces. I'm sure there's more, but let's pretend I did, as Josh said, I did this webinar in San Diego. Tacos were on the brain. So let's pretend you did this big trending piece, a big trend study, perhaps for a client or for your own brand. Now, let's walk through these steps. You got your taco trend. You want to find people that are topically relevant. Here's someone from San Diego Eater, Mona Holmes. She covers James Beard Awards. That has to do with food, San Diego, relevant, geo. But realistically, she's covering James Beard Awards only. When you look at her content, you'd rather have someone like Kim Smith, who's really covering something around the industry trends. These study finds avocado sales. This is the type of relevance. You need to match them where they are topically. We got geo relevance. Here's someone covers food news, Jane Smith, America's top 10 food chains, but this is America's top 10 fast food chains. Way too broad. You want someone who's maybe covering Southern California, right? Where this type of cuisine is a little more popular and it might be a little more relevant to Jeff Cox here. Let's get into timing. So timing is anything from the time zone to the certain days, holidays, that sort of thing. And we can see here these social media days like tax day. Here is a person, Gabe, wrote about tax day food deals. This is too broad. Yes, it's about food, but it's tax days, right? You're much better off pitching someone who's talking about National Taco Day, right? That is relevant to this person. This is the hook that you need. Last, there's format relevance. And I think this is probably the most important to understand. So here's someone that's written about the 25 best tacos in San Diego. Now, this may seem relevant because they're writing about tacos. We're pitching this taco survey, this trend study, whatever you call it. But realistically, this is a listicle, right? This is somebody just listing off different taco places in San Diego. We want someone who's covering the news. We want someone who's sharing a feature. This is a popular Midwest entertainment chain files for bankruptcy. She's covering some financial related news in the area. So that is more relevant when you come from a format perspective as well. So let me drive this home a little bit more with some real life examples. So Colin here, who I think is on this webinar, shout out to Colin, works at Noble. Colin shared this great study with me that he did. So this was cities with the largest gender pay gaps. Now, this is one of those kind of city index studies that I alluded to in the very beginning, where maybe you'd reach out to people, journalists in these top cities, right? You reach out to people in Frisco, Cary, Irvine, and let them know that they were on this list. And that is one angle to take, and I know Colin did that, but he also talked to me about finding reporters who covered things like gender equity, labor, pay, cost of living. These are topical connectors that he's making. And when I looked at his outreach, you could see here this keyword that stood out to me was this equal pay day. So here's the connection that Colin's making. And if you look, we can go back to who wrote about equal pay day last year. And you see it's this person, Chris Morris, covered it for NASDAQ, covered equal pay day last year. And lo and behold, this is the same Chris Morris that covers Colin's piece for equal pay day this year. That's the angle, that's the hook that he used to stay relevant. I also want to call out Colin. I thought did a great job. He shared with me the different angles that he took, and I love that he broke this down by time zone. Again, that's another kind of geo relevance to really personalize and make sure you're reaching out to the right people at the right time. And I think the results of this speak for itself. Ultimately, sent about 300 emails. None of those angles, I think, had more than 20, 30 journalist emails in them. And ultimately, you got 70 links. Let's go to Fractal here. Kelsey Liebert shared with me this great example, this GPU preferences survey that they did. So this is a very niche study for a very niche type of gamer, or realistically, the journalists that are going to cover this. And when I look at their outreach, you can really see that they are getting super targeted with the type, the hook, and the pitch here. They're really digging into these GPU upgrades. So I talked to Kip Wright, who did this, and Kip said they'd like to identify publications and then use these keywords and do a site search on the publications to find the right journalists. So if we take that concept here, those GPU upgrades, right? If you do a site search for something like PC World, you're going to see that not every writer is covering this. They're not all going to cover third-party surveys. Some of them might cover product releases or product reviews, that sort of thing. Ultimately, they were able to find someone who covered third-party surveys on another site that also contributed to PC World. And eventually, that's who they got to cover this piece. So the connection there was the format relevance, right? They're trying to find someone who covers that same format of the pitch, the same format of the story. And ultimately, Kip told me they sent about 50 emails, 47 links out of this hyper-targeted outreach. Last example here I want to share with you is Olivia Lott. So Olivia is a digital PR out of the UK. She shared this piece, The Quietest Places in the World's Loudest Cities. And was this really cool piece that came out where, they found these very quiet places in top cities. And so the outreach main kind of strategy here is to reach out to local journalists in the cities that came up on these lists. So Fresno's, people in London, San Jose, Phoenix. And here you'll see when you start to dig into this is the Oregonian. I see Mims Copeland. She's a writer at the Oregonian. And when I search for the word best, I can really hone in on the type of people who cover this type of content. So here's the best barbecue joints, the best ice cream place, the best aviation museums. Mims is the one who this would be most relevant for. And ultimately, she's the one that covered it. Actually, a cool thing that happened with Olivia here was she got coverage in the Oregonian, which actually led to this newsletter called PDX Today, or Hello Portland, part of PDX Today. So Olivia took this and ran with it, where she realized, okay, I know that the PDX Today is part of this larger network, so why don't I reach out to them and see if they have any other cities that are on my list? And as you can see, they had a lot of other cities that these newsletters are part of. So she actually packaged all of the cities in her study that were relevant to 6 a.m., gave them all the data, and then opened up the coverage to even more cities. So this is what kind of personalized relevant outreach looks like. This is the extreme. She's personally tailoring data, but this is what it takes. This is a personal connection. This is being relevant. And ultimately, overall, she sent about 300 emails. But again, when you look at the individual cities, she's not sending 300 to each city. She's sending 20, 30 tops and 150 links. So for a lot of people, especially those in the digital PR realm, but for those who are maybe coming from a link building perspective in the SEO world, this is going to be a big mindset shift. Okay. You gotta try to tone out these people that are saying that they're sending 250,000 emails a day. Some peak days they're hitting 1 million emails sending out for digital PR. This is what you have to do. This is not the way to do it these days. And if it seems obvious, why aren't more people just sending fewer emails? I think realistically, it's just because it's a time suck, right? It takes a lot of time. If, say, I was doing some outreach to San Diego, I had a city study and I was trying to find people, journalists who covered best cities in San Diego or best restaurants, whatever. I'd do a search like this, and then I'd have to click into every result. Then you're looking to find who wrote it, reading their bios, you're checking recent articles, reading recent articles, really understanding what they've done. And then you got to repeat that process for everybody on the SERP, right? And all the different angles that you want. So here's where I'm going to clearly pitch you this thing that we created, and this is List IQ. And this is a new tool from Buzzstream that essentially takes that process that I outlined here and just streamlines it. So you would do a search to try to find journalists who are covering the same types of things. Then you're going to select all of the people in your search result that you want to extract information from. Then you're going to go to List IQ and you're going to say, okay, find me their activity check. Tell me if they're still active at their publication. What's their job title? What's their bio? What's their email address? Show me their recent articles. Then it's going to run. You can view it right in Google Sheets. And then from here, you easily see the articles, authors, whether or not they're active at the publication. You can read their bios to really understand their beat and if your post is going to be relevant to them, if your pitch is going to be relevant. You can see their verified email addresses. Now, these are verified. These aren't like pattern matching guesses that you see in a lot of these email finder tools. And lastly, recent articles. You can get about 10 fit in here. They're 10 most recent articles. This is the kind of information you need to have this super relevant outreach. This is what the targeted outreach looks like. And I mentioned I was going to come back because there was a happy ending to this story. The people in the very beginning, the team that came in and wanted to send thousands of emails, they just weren't doing it. They got banned. This is what some of their campaigns look like: 490 cent, 892 cent. They weren't barely getting opens, they weren't getting replies or links. Talk to them, we share them a lot of this data, we walk them through the process, and now they're sending fewer than 100 emails per campaign, as you could see here. 50% open rates. They're getting clicks, they're getting replies. Most of all, they're getting coverage. Let me just share a quick set of resources here. And I alluded to a few of these people, and I just think they're invaluable to the space here. Britt Klontz. I think I saw Jacqueline on this as well. Jacqueline and Britt used to have a fantastic podcast. Britt now has her podcast, Digital PR Explained. And Britt, I think, does a great job of really focusing in on how long it takes to craft a pitch that actually resonates with people and that it's okay to spend a lot of time to get one result, to one link, two links. And that's the kind of mindset you need to have. That's why I like to highlight Britt here. Rosie Taylor, I mentioned her, Get Featured Substack. It's a great Substack. She's a journalist, but she also provides a lot of pitching techniques and tips. Colin Zarnicki, he has his great newsletter. He was also a former journalist, turned digital PR agency owner, pitched as his newsletter. Mark Rofe, he's like the OG in the UK market. His is just called Digital PR Newsletter. He shares really great candid tips. And of course, this little thing called the Buzzstream podcast and our newsletter that we have. Yeah, the kind of rallying call here is that the more targeted you are, the better you're going to do in digital PR these days. I'll throw it back over to you, Josh, here. I know
Yeah, that's
That's been shared as
perfect.
well.
Thank you for that. Just a quick mention about AI search with AirOps. Digital PR and links also helps you get seen in LLMs like ChatGPT and Perplexity. We're going to chat a little bit more about that. And then also we're doing some big offsite promotions too around like Reddit and some outreach things. So if you want a comprehensive workflow to help you for AI search and to refresh your brand, feel free to scan the QR code there. And you can put webinar in the subject line. Just email us at growth@airops.com. So yeah, we're gonna dive into a bit more on Q&A here. If you want to go to the next slide, I believe.
Yeah, we went.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let me mention this too
Yeah,
while we're here. So Vince is just one of the great webinars we have coming up on Friday. Actually, tomorrow we have Maddie French will be showing us some content engineering workflows that she's built in AirOps. And then again, continuing that offsite theme, we are having Allison Havner from Trust Radius, which is a big SaaS review site. She will also be talking about marketing and sales alignment, but also answering some questions around third-party review sites. And then Ross Simmons, you may know him. He's really big on Reddit and repurposing. He's going to be talking about how Reddit impacts your LLM visibility, how it also impacts your search results. So those will really be great resources. You can find that. I'll drop that in the chat as well to sign up for all of those. Yeah. If you do have questions for Vince, go ahead and drop them in to the chat. Vince, a couple questions I did have, maybe just to level set a bit. I'm coming from like SEO and content world, and I know about PR. We have PR teams, but maybe just tell me real quick, traditional PR versus digital PR and how you perceive those differences.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely blending these days, and it's funny, depending on who you ask, it's really probably going to differ. But I think traditionally, like digital PR was an offshoot of link building. And so the tactic really is trying to get yourself mentioned or linked to from high DA publications or industry news sites. How you go about doing that, it depends. So, like, you can do data studies, like creating data studies, like some of the city index studies I mentioned. There's like reactive strategies where, say, there's something happening in the news, and maybe you have someone at your brand that can comment on it, or you have a client that can comment on it, and you pitch that to a journalist. There's like proactive pitching where if you know something's going to come up soon, winter's coming, and you have some tips from your plumber client on your pipes or something, you can pitch that to journalists who might cover that type of thing on a yearly basis, holidays, these social media days. And what am I missing? The other thing, I guess, is like journalist requests. Like that is
Mm.
also a kind of popular service offering, I think, in the digital PR realm where there's platforms for this, but you could also go on like Twitter and just look for people, journalists who are requesting information. But there's platforms like Quoted or Haro is back, Source of Sources is another one. I feel like those are probably the main tactics, but at its core, it's just like you're trying to get your brand either mentioned or linked to from industry news sites and relevant publications.
Yeah. And
Well,
then,
sorry, and Josh, the flip side would be traditional, where I think some of those goals are still aligned with the digital, but like with traditional, I think of more things like pop-up shops and product launches and product partnerships and things that happen offline more like you can tie those to digital goals, but for the most part, they are offline driven and start in the offline realm, if that makes sense.
yeah, that's a good distinction there for sure. I'm thinking about, I think you're walking through like the San Diego example, and then also the example with like Portland, and I'm forgetting the strategist's name who was able to take that to
Yeah,
like
Olivia. Yeah.
multiple cities. Do
Yeah.
you do you think that's like local is like a good strategy to start? I know it depends on what you're trying to pitch, but is it easier to like hit some of those publications and then maybe scale up to a bigger brand or domain or something like that?
Great question. So it depends on your story, depends on your angle, like all that stuff really depends. I'd say if you're doing that, like the reason people do these like city index studies is because you are leaning on like this ego bait thing where you're hoping that a local journalist doesn't have a ton of news happening and they're gonna bite. because you've highlighted them on this list and they're going to be so blown away and so honored that you are on this list. Now, reality of the situation is that these days everybody is doing those, so I don't know how much weight they carry. I'm sure local journalists still get pitched those a million times. So I think to answer your question more directly, yes, it might be easier to get into some local pubs. Like I wouldn't start just pitching New York Times, but that's not to say you're definitely going to get coverage if you start at your local newspaper. I think it still comes down to the story and is it super relevant to those areas. I think it does. One of the things you're maybe hinting at is it benefits you to think about. I just did this whole kind of analysis of YouGov, for instance. They're a big survey platform, and I looked at all of their surveys that they've done in the past like 5 years or something, and try to understand like what makes a good data survey and like why people pick it up. And
Hmm.
ultimately it comes down to like timeliness and if there's an emotional tie to it. And I think you can say that about most of the news. If your stuff that you're pitching isn't timely, it's probably not going to catch. So you need something that's going to hook them from that perspective, but then also it's got to be surprising. You can't just pitch anybody anything. And I think there is like a relevancy piece of that too when you get into talking about like local news versus large news. So if you're pitching someone in New Hampshire or something, like ideally you will put yourself in a much better position if you can make it much more relevant to them in whatever capacity you're going to. Maybe your data study found that somebody in New Hampshire had more whatever, ate more tacos than in Florida or something. So yeah, I think there has to be a relevancy to it if you're gonna really start there. I don't think you should think about it from that perspective.
Yeah, I'll take the bet that Florida eats more tacos than New Hampshire. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna go ahead and go with that one. So we've mentioned like data reports and research reports. Is there other formats or other types of content that you're seeing like gain traction with journalists or something else they may be interested in, or anything you want to speak to about that would be
I mean,
interesting.
I think the data stuff seems to be what's catching right now. And when you think about it, there's two things. There's data, and I think there's this idea of having a case study or like a real life person and source. There is this, and I'm sh sure some of you have been following it, or there's this new kind of phenomenon, maybe not so new, of these fake experts and fake sources. It's more, seems like more of an issue in the UK, but there's a lot of people posing as experts. There was one story that came out was like in the Independent, I think, where there was someone who was saying they were a cleaner, a royal cleaner, right? Like for the royals.
Oh,
And so
okay.
they had all these insights about what it was like to clean here and whatever. And there all these news stories came out of it. And then all of a sudden, like somebody started diving into it, and they're like, "This person's not even real. This person didn't exist."
Mm.
And yet, it got coverage, and it got multiple pieces written about it. And there was the same thing about lottery winners. Same deal. It was they found out it was totally fabricated, and they started digging into it and found that there's a couple agencies that have been doing this type of thing. So I say all that to make the point that journalists, and there's actually some data behind this as well. I think it was Muckrack or Cision found what journalists really want from PR professionals these days is access to sources, even more than original data. And I think
Hmm.
it's because of this. There's so much AI slop out there that people can't really tell what is. So if you're going to pitch, I think data is always going to be great because it's new. It's never been written about before. It's if you could do it as an exclusive, that's even better. Journalists seem to like exclusives, but that kind of stuff, if it's got a good hook and if it's new, that's something AI can't replicate. And I think you put yourself in a great position as a brand to be able to produce things that AI can't replicate, especially if you're talking about showing up in AI citations, you're getting two benefits out of that. But then, yeah, the other side is if you have a source at your brand, your company, who, your CEO or a thought leader who is really knowledgeable about something that is going on in the news, you could pitch yourself as an expert. And, but you have to just make sure you frame it in as best way as possible so that the journalist knows you're legit and this person is legit. So I've heard journalists want Zoom calls, LinkedIn, like I want to see their LinkedIn profiles, but like actually getting on the phone with them That's a big thing these days, I've heard.
Wow, so the old ways are back. You want actually want to get on the phone with somebody and see
Yeah,
that they're real.
I know everything. Yeah, and it's just we're in the matrix now, and we don't know what's real.
We have several folks, or AirOps does a lot of work with B2B SaaS companies. And so I do want to talk a little bit more about SEO and link building here in a second. But we did have a couple good questions come in. Jackie, I was wondering about this in the same way. She asked, how does newsroom outreach fall into all of this? She's thinking that newsrooms are getting fatigued with ranking lists, even if they are relevant to the locale. And then also, like, I also had this question, like, how many email pitches is like Rosie receiving like on a daily basis? I'm sure it's a
Yeah,
ton.
dude,
So
it's
what's like the open
yeah.
rates for that?
Yeah, it's getting nuts. You saw like it was like 15% more pitches per day. It really depends on who you ask and where you go. I think the newsroom thing where so like it's two different markets. I guess I can talk more about the US here. Like the US is really interesting because when you talk about local news, there's a lot of totally blanking. Colin, maybe you can help me out if you're still on here. I'm totally blanking on who does this study, but they did this. It's called the like local news deserts, and they map where these areas in the United States that you just don't get covered. So we have this big problem of local news not having great outlets. So when you talk about is it easier to pitch local, and maybe talking backwards on myself here, but it might even be harder in some areas because there are so few journalists that are trying to cover so much stuff. And to speak directly to the one point you make as well, the city index thing, yeah, I think that is personally, and I know this is something that a lot of our customers still do, and a lot of great agencies still do if it works. But I think that is probably going to get played out if it's not played out already, because you're right, like so many people are getting these. Now, that's not to say if you have a really killer hook and it's a really great story, it's not going to work. But I think the problem that we're seeing is there are people that are still doing this kind of spray and pray tactic that I was talking about, where you get a city study and you blast it out to 5,000, 10,000 journalists because you're literally going, find me all the journalists in Kansas City, like regardless
Right.
of what they cover. I don't care if they're covering local news. I don't care if they're whatever. And that's adding to this problem, this adding to this noise. And so, yeah, the journalists are getting a lot more pitches per day. And I don't think we can stop at just pitching. I think that's another piece of this that we didn't really cover in the webinar, but there is a piece of this of PR now where the relationship that you have with a journalist is becoming more important. And it's not necessarily, hey, like I'm going to go out to coffee with you and just because I know you, you're going to cover my piece. Like you still have to give them something good, but realistically what that does, I think, is just at least gets your name to pop out maybe in an inbox where if somebody recognizes you, it's, oh, okay, I can trust Vince because he's pitched me relevant stuff in the past. So you're building this trust with journalists, but I think you have to start doing that outside of just inboxes because to your point, Jackie, like they are super crowded these days. They're getting tons of pitches. Some people are getting 100 pitches. It depends. I've heard 1,000 a day. Some people are like 50. Some studies say it's just 11 or 12. So it really depends on who you ask, I think. But I think the takeaway for me is you can't just rely on just an email pitch these days. You got to really build some new relationships. And I've heard from people say if you're looking to get started in this, find relevant journalists in your niche, introduce yourself, introduce your brand, and just say, hey, I'm here. I'm a knowledgeable person about XYZ. These are my credentials. I'm real happy to talk about it. But if any news comes up and you need an expert source, I'm here for you, kind of thing. So that ultimately they're going to reach out to you rather than you pitching them.
Yeah, maybe to follow up a bit, as we've talked a lot about journalists, and now I'm thinking of, I come from the B2B SaaS world. Do you see any value in maybe like reaching out to, I don't know, like Substacks and things like that? Or I guess the blog used to be the thing, but now maybe Substacks is more like it, or somebody's newsletter, like all the ones that you showed there. Any tips or ideas around that?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think Substacks are going to start and like podcasts, like these, there's alternative methods that are even more like the link building mindset, right? Where you're just finding places that people are being active. I think the smartest link builders think that way anyway. That makes total sense for me. And I think we're seeing more of this like melding again of like traditional and PR and SEO, link, they're all coming together where because people aren't just focusing on news sites anymore. And there's even people getting studies are coming out where like for the first time ever in the history of media, people are getting their news from social media more than they are online publications.
Mhm.
So that to me is okay, yeah, we got to start meeting people where they're at. Like maybe PRs have to start creating videos. Maybe the Substack I think is a fantastic opportunity there as well because owned audiences are so important as more people kind of branch off and find their niche publications that they really want to listen to or niche newsletters that they really resonate with. That's one great way to get your message to the right people. At the end of the day, like the whole idea with PR and digital PR is you want to increase your footprint so that you can get more sales, get more leads. So if
Right.
you're thinking about the core audience and where they're spending their time, you 100% have to think about stuff like that, newsletters and podcasts and Substacks and Reddit. That's another one. I'm sure Ross Simmons will talk about that more on his webinar in the next couple of days for you guys. But yeah, it's becoming so important, I think, to diversify.
Yeah, it's almost like several worlds are coming together because it's like, influencers on YouTube can talk about your data study just as well as some other
Yeah.
folks and might get some attention there too.
Yeah.
Maybe as we kind of wrap things up here a bit, if you could just chat a little bit about like how you're seeing digital PR impact maybe LLM visibility around like ChatGPT and Perplexity and just some of the trends that you're seeing on your end of things.
Yeah, I'm seeing probably what everybody else is seeing. I think that the flagship study for me that I keep coming back to was an Href study, although I just saw a SEMrush one that Kevin Indig did a week or so ago I can share. But in both cases, no, sorry, unlinked mentions. So like it used to be all about getting a link, and now it seems like it's okay to get an unlinked mention. So this was something that like PR people have always tried to champion, and Google does think it's important, just in the same way that an SEO would argue like a no follow link is not important, whereas a PR person would be like, I do think a no follow link is important. We have some strong evidence that the thing that most highly correlates with showing up in AI overviews, at least, is unlinked mentions more
Hmm.
so than number of backlinks, more so than domain rating, that sort of thing. Now, slightly differently, although similar, SEMrush found they looked across not just AI overviews, but all of the platforms. This was Kevin Indig's study, and he found the thing that most highly correlated to showing up in these citations was actually SEMrush's authority score, which similar to domain rating and domain authority, all these metrics that we know of. But he also did find a very high correlation with unlinked mentions as well. So realistically, that's why I think everybody's flocking to digital PR is because unlinked mentions, specifically from high DA publications, those are what everybody seems to think impact the most with AI. And I should say there's a couple other little things. There's a lot of data, a lot of publishers are getting into data partnerships with major media companies. Sorry, with the AI companies. So OpenAI has, which runs ChatGPT, has something like 20, I think, partnerships with different publications. So people have taken that step and let's try to get into those because they have the partnerships. I don't think it's been really any conclusive data that like they're showing up more, but that's at least the thought process there. And the last thing I'll say is, and although this may be changing depending on who you ask, like Reddit is also something that people are seeing you show up on a lot. Or sorry, Reddit. citations are showing up a lot in AI. There's some strategies there that even digital PR people are trying to do where it's let's get into AI as much as possible. Again, that kind of plays to the brand mentions and just like building your brand awareness. The more people you can get talking about your brand, even if you're publishing some cool news study that then somebody happens to mention on Reddit, that's the kind of through line I think that people take. And then hopefully you'll get mentioned on in AI because of it.
Yeah, so maybe just to make it very concrete, it's like XYZ company published this 31 whatever city study. You're hopefully the journalist is like mentioning your brand alongside the study, even if they don't link to it, and then that helps influence mentions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. That is super helpful because I know I saw somebody say like finally, and Jackie said finally, mentions are getting their due. Like it's not a failure if you didn't get a link. And I was a former journalist, and so I would write something, and then somebody would always email me back and be like, "Can you please link to X, Y, and Z?" And I was just like, "I don't think I can. That's not with our standards, that sort of thing." So I know that's always been a problem for journalists and PR agencies to navigate. So I'm glad to see it swinging the other way.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Sorry, I didn't realize I was still sharing this. I can show people my
Oh
face
yeah.
answering questions.
No problem. I think that is a really great place to wrap up here. Vince, I really appreciate your time today. We've left all of the comments and notes and links in the chat. So find Vince on LinkedIn, find him on the Buzzstream podcast. And then, yeah, as we wrap up, feel free to email us at growth@airops.com with webinar in the subject line if you want to learn more about LLM visibility, prioritization, action you can take on your content or for your clients too. We'd be happy to chat about that. And then, oh yeah, maybe I could share my screen real quick, but
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Friday, tomorrow, we're having Maddie French. She's going to be showing some really great content engineering workflows. So feel free to join for that too. Yeah, but otherwise, everyone have a great day. Thanks, Vince. I really appreciate it.